having sort of found the property, it's then a question of sort of going through the process. And I just wondering if you could put people through how it varies from what they may be used to in the UK or elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the UK, if you buy a property, you'd instruct your own lawyer. You wouldn't leave it to an estate agent to manage the conveyancing process. Sometimes agents across Spain will try and encourage people buyers to maybe use them as a conveyancer because they know the process and familiar with it. But I'd always recommend that you instruct an independent lawyer. That independent lawyer confirms their costs in writing to you, and also the overall cost of the purchase. Because depending on where you buy in Spain, Nigel, you've had 3 established estate agents there talk about their different areas. The costs vary, and the costs vary also whether you buy a brand new property or a second-hand property. So, for example, in Spain, when you buy a property, you pay what's known as transfer tax, purchase property tax, and basically in the Valencian region, which includes Alicante, it's 10%. Catalonia, it's 10% as well. You move down the coast to Murcia and Andalusia, and that's 8%. So, as part of finding that perfect property, is also important, I think, to bear in mind budget, and that's something that people can do before, something to consider before buying. But I'd allow basically between 12 and 14% on top of the purchase price to purchase a property. And if you're buying a brand new property, you're going to pay 10% VAT, IVA in Spain, and you'll also pay stamp duty at 1.5%. So the cost there then could go up to 15%.
In terms of the way that the property purchase process works, is it very similar in terms of offer acceptance and then going through to exchange contracts and completion as you would see in the UK, or is it rather different?
Yeah, but basically, Nigel, so before we even get to that stage, I think it's very important that people are looking at coming to move out to Spain, either to live or to buy a property, that they consider carefully the regions, the towns, the buying cost. If they're going to apply for a mortgage, I say contact an independent mortgage broker, find out from them how much you can borrow. Typically in Spain, banks will lend up to 65 or 70% of the value, and if you're looking at costs of 12-14% on top, you're going to need a deposit of at least 45%. So I think before you come out to Spain, it's important to kind of look at those figures, and also think about whether or not it's going to be a holiday home or it's going to be a house for you to live in. Because if it's a holiday home, then you probably want less maintenance, and you want to be able to arrive at the property fairly quickly. So typically you're looking at a property within an hour of an airport, and bear in mind the main airports, I'm talking Barcelona, Alicante and Malaga, would service the holiday areas, and then there are other airports along there as well, but less frequent flights. So I think do your homework first, then also think about who's going to own it, who's paying for it. So if it's a married couple, obviously they probably buy in their joint names. But if for example it was an unmarried couple or someone with more liquidity than the other one, then you can actually change the ownership. So if I was buying a property with someone and I was putting 75% of the value in, and they were putting 25% in, then we can own at the land registry 75-25% each. So just consider who's going to own it. And also, Nigel, we come across clients, they're elderly clients, just about or have retired or got some money behind them, and they want to buy a Spanish property, and they want that to kind of flow through the generations to their children and grandchildren. They can actually purchase the property in their children's names. So the children, so long as they're over the age of 18, could own the property. They would be the legal owners of the property, and the parents could actually be the life interest. They could be the owners of the life interest in that property. So there's various ownership options to consider. Obviously, if you do go down that route, then you've got to have a very important, I'd say, family conversation and talk about what happens if your child was to get divorced and you paid for that property, to make it clear, an uncomfortable conversation with a potential new son or daughter-in-law about who would get what in the event of divorce, and obviously debt or a death. So a Spanish will would cover that off. So those are the things I think you've got to consider before buying a property. And then really, start looking for a property. So talk to the agents we've just seen. They cover broad areas of Spain. Start talking to an agent once you've found the region and the town that you're interested in. Joanne was mentioning there the Jalón Valley. I have active clients buying there. It's a really nice area. Calpe is quite stunning. And then I live in Marbella at the moment. I've lived on the other side of the Costa del Sol. So I know Spain quite well. We travel to the islands for our holiday. So the Canaries and Balearics, also great areas. So there is something for everyone in Spain, and it's just a question, I think, of getting out there and feeling it, and then once you're comfortable, then making the move. The first step, I would say, is consider appointing independent lawyers. So typically we put powers of attorney in place for clients. We're doing that quite a lot at the moment. People are looking to come out to Spain in September, October, so we're putting powers of attorney in place. That's an important document that authorizes us to act for you in Spain to buy a Spanish property. But in the meantime, until you find a property, we can apply for your Spanish tax number, which is known as an NIE number. That doesn't mean you become a Spanish tax resident, it just means that you've got an NIE number and that you can pay tax in Spain when you buy a property. So consider appointing an independent lawyer, opening a bank account, speaking to local agents, and also opening an account with a FX company. So I think those Nigel, are the things to do, to consider before buying, and what you can do before you've even found a property.
So once you've got there, one of the things that people hear about are the sort of problems with Spanish property, legal developments and things like that. Obviously, having an independent lawyer is an important factor in that, but is it much similar to the searches that you would see in the UK to make sure that is that the main role of the big lawyer?
So basically, yeah, the conveyancing process is generally similar in that there's an offer, there's an acceptance, and then searches will be carried out, due diligence carried out. Lawyers will report back to their clients, and assuming everything's happy, then the contracts will be exchanged, and then you complete. But in Spain, it's slightly different in that here we've got the position of the notary. So basically, it's a lawyer who's continued to study and has been appointed a notary, passed the notarial exams, and then they've been given a position as a notary in the local town. And basically, all official documents such as purchases of property, sales of property, Spanish will, company incorporation, or an inheritance have to be signed before a notary. And a notary is there to protect both parties, to make sure that that basically what if you're going to buy a property, the property that you are buying is the property that the seller is selling, and they'll carry out searches. But basically, Nigel, from the UK perspective, what we also find is that in comparison to the UK, Spanish property purchases can take a lot less time. We don't tend to have chains in Spain, so once you've found a property, you can complete within as quickly as 4 weeks. On average, I'd say allow between 4 and 12 weeks to complete. And many clients contact us, Nigel, when they're actually with the agent, and they say, look, Alex, I found a property. The agent's asked us to pay some money over and sign a reservation contract. If it's okay if I send it over to you, and I'd certainly encourage that. So I'd like to see that reservation contract. If you've got a mortgage, then we need to subject that reservation contract to the mortgage. If you want a survey, then that reservation contract should also be subject to survey. And we typically, insert in a reservation contract kind of all-encompassing clause, which would basically be, that for example, a statement from the seller that the property is fully legal, that the property is fully legal, it's all registered at the land registry, it has its license of first occupation, which means that the town hall inspected the property once it had been built and confirmed it had been built according to that planning permission, and they issued that planning permission. And then with that license of first occupation, sorry, not the planning permission, the town hall issued the license of first occupation, and you can then connect to the mains, water, and electric. So we would basically put in that clause, and once that clause has been put in, and you've put in there, for example, typically you'd pay between 3,000 and 6,000 euros to take the property off the market, and then you would the exchange contracts about 3 or 4 weeks later, and then completion would be at a future date. Mortgages are taking a little bit longer to obtain, so if you are applying for a mortgage, I would allow at least up to 2 months to complete.
Right. Okay. And what are the sort of the main issues that you tend to see coming from those searches? I mean, I think you've mentioned many of them, but which do you see as the ones that cause the problems the most often, or that raise issues?
So typically, once the reservation contract is signed, we would contact the agent or the seller's lawyer, and we would ask for all the property documents. So we want to see the deed of purchase, we want to see if there's a license of first occupation, we want to see water receipts, electric receipts, and if the property is on a community of owners, we ask for minutes of the community minutes for the last 3 years, because if you're buying so another, I suppose, difference between the UK and Spain is that in Spain you only buy freehold. There's no leasehold unless you're buying a kind of commercial premises. But by and behold, if you're buying a residential property, it will be freehold. But for example, if you buy an apartment or a townhouse, that may be on a community of owners, which means you own the property freehold, and then you become a shareholder in the community of owners. And that basically means that you have to contribute monthly costs to the community, and you have a say in how the community is run. Usually the community is run by a professional administrator and a president, which tends to be appointed by one of the owners, by the owners committee. So basically, we see that get those documents in, Nigel. We apply for land searches in English and Spanish. I think it's amazing that the Spanish Land Registry issues those in English and Spanish, and then we compare all the paperwork we've got. So it's very important, if you're intending to rent the property, that, for example, for holiday rentals, that you have a license of first occupation in place. If you're intending to rent it long term, then it's not necessary to have that license of first occupation, although it's a good document to have. And if you're, for example, buying in the Canaries, then when you purchase a property there, the property has to have what's known as a touristic license, a licencia turística. So it's very difficult to get one of those in the Canaries and also the Balearics if you don't buy a property with those licenses already in place. Typically, we carry out our searches, Nigel, and sometimes we come across, for example, a pool hasn't been registered, or someone completed an extension and that hasn't been registered. So we basically ask the seller for more information about that. We'd ask if they applied for licenses, for example, to add the pool or the extension. And if they hadn't, then we'd consider the legal situation. Generally speaking, though, if an extension has been built or added to a property and more than 6 months have elapsed and the town hall hasn't taken any action against the owners, then the seller can add that to the deeds, so long as it's not on protected land. So we would ask them to go through that process before or at completion, and we withhold the costs of them to do that. So they would sign a deed declaring those buildings. The costs of registration and the taxes involved we would hold back from the purchase monies, and then we could sign the deed of completion. Those I'd say, those are the main issues. So in Andalusia, sometimes also we have what's known as a DAFO. A DAFO basically means that the property may have been extended or didn't have planning permission originally, and retrospective planning permission can be obtained. And that's basically the DAFO process. So if you're looking at buying a property in Andalusia and the countryside, then we would check to see if the property had a DAFO, and if not, we'd find out how long it would take to obtain. And we try and tie that in with the completion.
Right. And then what happens at completion? Is that, again, similar to the UK or better?
Well, basically, once we've prepared our legal report and reported back to the clients, we would send them a contract. We take into account the payment they've already made, and we set out various clauses in the contract. We state when completion is going to be made and when exchange of contracts is going to happen. So in effect, once everyone's happy with what they're buying, and the contract is agreed, with exchange contracts, pay balance of 10%. So if you've paid a reservation contract, paid monies under reservation contract, those monies would come off. So you exchange contract, pay 10%, and then we set a date for completion. And exchange of contracts is usually the lawyer can sign on your behalf using the power of attorney, or you can sign yourself, and you would basically, we personally like to see all the money's coming through our client's account, so we can justify that when it comes to notary completion. And completion is actually at the notary. So whereas the UK completion is over the phone, here in Spain we actually have to go to the notary in person. If you've granted a power of attorney to your lawyer, then the lawyer can go on your behalf. So I've got a completion coming up on Thursday. The clients are due to come out on Friday, so we'll complete for them and then hand them the keys on Friday. But basically, at completion, we would send we'd send a copy of the contract that we've signed to the notary. We'd send them details of what has been agreed. They prepare a deed, and then we would agree the final figures with between the seller's lawyer and the buyer's lawyer. The final figures are agreed. So, for example, if there's a mortgage, then obviously that has to be cancelled at completion. The costs of cancelling at the land registry and notary will retain. So any debts that are there would be taken off. And also, Nigel, if you're buying on a community of owners, then we want to see a certificate from the community confirming that there are no debts with the community. So in effect, we finalise the figures, feed those figures to the notary. The notary would set those out in a deed. We'd go along to completion with the powers of attorney or with the clients. We'd sign the deed, pay over the balance of the purchase price, and then in exchange for that, receive the keys. And that is then completion. So from that date, the buyer owns the property. We would then collect the deed from the notary, pay the notary fees, pay the transfer tax or VAT if you bought a new property, and stamp duty, and then we'd register it in the client's name. And that process takes about 2 months. I also recommend that at completion, that or if someone doesn't come out to complete, that they put in place a Spanish will. I'd recommend a Spanish will for Spanish assets, and have a UK will for worldwide assets, and worldwide assets and UK assets, except those located in Spain. We recommend that an English will works closely with a Spanish will. If you update your English will, the first clause of an English will is typically, I revoke all former wills, and I suggest you let your English lawyer or UK lawyer, home country lawyer know that you've got a Spanish property, know that you've got a Spanish will in place, and therefore that first clause should be, I revoke all former wills except my Spanish will dated X. So I'd say definitely have a Spanish will in place. Also consider a lasting power of attorney if you're retiring to Spain and intending to live out your last days here. Have a power of attorney in place to a trusted person, to a spouse, so that if anything happens to you, they can manage your affairs. But yeah, generally speaking, Nigel, that's basically all for me.